There's this moment where Cartman is standing in the middle of a room full of manatees. Real, actual manatees. They're floating around in a tank, and they're pushing these little balls with words on them into a slot. And whoever's ball makes it into the slot, that becomes the next joke on Family Guy. That's how the jokes get written. Manatees, random balls, no thought, no story, no intention, just chaos funneled into a punchline. And look, I know that sounds like I'm making it up, but that's an actual scene from South Park. Season 10, Episode 4, Cartoon Wars Part 2, aired April 12, 2006. Trey Parker and Matt Stone didn't just take a shot at Family Guy. They built an entire mythology around the idea that Family Guy's writing process is fundamentally random, that the jokes don't connect to the story, that the cutaway gags are just noise dressed up as comedy. And the wildest part? Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy himself, watched that episode and said it was funny and accurate. Think about that for a second. The guy who made the show being mocked agreed with the mockery. And I keep coming back to that because I think that moment, that two-parter, that manatee tank, that entire philosophical argument about what comedy is supposed to do, I think it tells you everything you need to know about why South Park is still here, still relevant, still getting billion-dollar deals in 2025, while Family Guy quietly became something people leave on in the background when they can't find the remote. I've been thinking about this for months, honestly, probably years, because as someone who has watched both of these shows since I was way too young to be watching either of them, I've had a front row seat to watching one show evolve into something genuinely important and another show settle into comfortable mediocrity. And comfortable mediocrity isn't an insult. It's a description. It's what happens when a show stops pushing and starts coasting. And I think understanding why one show pushed and the other coasted tells you something not just about animation, not just about comedy, but about creativity itself, about what it takes to stay alive in a medium that is designed to consume you. Tonight, we're talking about that. We're going through all of it. Not just the rivalry between the two shows, although, yeah, we'll get deep into that. But the bigger question underneath it, why has South Park survived? Why does it still matter? Why does it still make people angry, make people laugh, make headlines? And why did Family Guy, a show that was once so popular, it literally came back from the dead through DVD sales? Why did it fade into this kind of comfortable irrelevance where nobody really hates it, but nobody really cares either? So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable. We're going to be here for a while. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Every time you hit that button, it means we get to keep doing this. And I genuinely love doing this. Okay, so let's start where both of these shows started, because I think the origin stories tell you almost everything about why they ended up where they are. South Park premiered on August 13th, 1997. The very first episode, Cartman gets an anal probe, debuted on Comedy Central. And here's what people forget. Comedy Central was basically nothing before South Park. The channel had just lost the rights to Mystery Science Theater 3000 to the Sci-Fi Channel. The biggest thing they had going was Dr. Katz, professional therapist. That was it. That was the lineup. And then these two guys from Colorado, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who'd met in a film class at the University of Colorado in 1992. They showed up with a crudely animated short called The Spirit of Christmas that had become one of the first viral videos on the internet. And when Doug Herzog, the Comedy Central executive, watched that short, he commissioned a full series. Parker and Stone spent 3 months making that pilot on a budget of $300,000. The first episode was the only one animated almost entirely with actual construction paper, using stop-motion techniques. Every episode after that was done digitally. And here's the thing that kills me. The show nearly got canceled before it ever aired. It tested horribly with focus groups, especially with women. But because the internet shorts kept spreading, Comedy Central went ahead and ordered 6 episodes anyway. Those 6 episodes turned into 13. And by the 10th episode, the Nielsen rating had climbed from a 1.3 to a 6.4. During the spring of 1998, 8 of the 10 highest rated shows on basic cable were South Park episodes. The number of households carrying Comedy Central jumped from 9.1 million in 1997 to 50 million by June 1998. Advertisers who had been paying $7,500 for a 30-second spot were suddenly paying $40,000. Some were paying $80,000. South Park didn't just become a hit show, it became the show that built a network. Now here's Family Guy, January 31st, 1999, a year and a half after South Park debuted. Seth MacFarlane, a 24-year-old graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, had created 2 animated shorts, The Life of Larry and Larry and Steve, that caught the attention of Fox executives. He pitched a 15-minute pilot in May of 1998, and Fox greenlit it. The premiere aired immediately after Super Bowl 33. 22 million people watched that first episode. Death Has a Shadow. 22 million. That's a staggering number. That post-Super Bowl slot is basically the most coveted premiere window in television history. And Family Guy was good. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Those first 3 seasons had energy. They had a weird, manic charm. Peter Griffin felt like a character, not just a delivery system for cutaway gags. Stewie was this bizarre, evil baby who wanted to kill his mother, and that concept alone was unlike anything else on television. Brian was the voice of reason, a talking dog who read Dostoevsky and drank martinis. The show had something, but here's where the first big difference shows up, and I think it's the single most important structural difference between these 2 shows. Who makes them, and how much do they care? Trey Parker and Matt Stone write South Park. They voice most of the characters. They direct. They produce. They are in the room every single week, making that show from scratch in 6 days. 6 days. There's a documentary about this, 6 Days to Air, which premiered on October 9th, 2011 on Comedy Central. It follows the production of the season 15 premiere, Human Centipede, and it's kind of insane to watch. Parker and Stone come back from the opening night of The Book of Mormon on Broadway, which, by the way, would go on to win 9 Tony Awards, and they walk straight into the writer's room with 0 ideas. Nothing. They start from absolute 0 on a Thursday, and by the following Wednesday, a finished episode is being sent via satellite uplink to Comedy Central headquarters in New York, sometimes just hours before it airs. And the thing about that process that I find genuinely remarkable, and I've rewatched that documentary probably 4 times putting this together, is that Trey Parker is almost always unhappy with the final product. He said that more often than not, he's disappointed when an episode is finished, but the deadline forces his hand. He can't hold on to it. It has to go. And there's something about that pressure, that sprint, that all-nighter, where they're still finalizing the script at 7 in the morning on the day before air, that gives South Park its feeling. That raw, urgent, of-the-moment quality that no other show has ever been able to replicate. Saturday Night Live comes close, but even SNL has a week, and they're only doing sketches, not a continuous 22-minute story with multiple subplots and character arcs and social commentary. Now compare that to Seth MacFarlane's involvement with Family Guy. And I want to be fair here, because this gets misunderstood a lot. MacFarlane created the show. He voices Peter, Stewie, Brian, Quagmire, and a bunch of other characters. He's an executive producer. But here's the thing. During a Reddit AMA in September 2017, MacFarlane revealed that he hadn't written for the show since 2010. He only wrote the scripts for 3 episodes in the entire run of the show. 3 out of over 450 episodes. Death Has a Shadow, the pilot. Family Guy viewer male number 1 in season 3. And North by North Quahog, the season 4 premiere that brought the show back from cancellation in 2005. That's it, 3 episodes. Since season 16 in 2017, the show has been run by co-showrunners Alex Sulkin and Richard Appel, and they've done fine work. They keep the machine running, they love the show, they credit MacFarlane as the creative foundation. But it's a machine without its inventor at the controls. And I think you can feel that. I think anyone who's watched both the early seasons and the recent ones can feel the difference, even if they can't quite name what changed. And look, I get it. MacFarlane has a lot going on. He created American Dad, which is actually a better structured show in a lot of ways. He made Ted, which grossed over $500 million worldwide. He created The Orville. He hosted the Oscars. The man has range. But South Park has always been Parker and Stone, and Parker and Stone have always been South Park. They never left. They never handed the keys to someone else. When they signed that $900 million deal with Viacom CBS in August of 2021, one of the richest deals in television history, covering 6 more seasons and 14 movies for Paramount Plus, they weren't signing a deal for someone else to make South Park. They were signing a deal to keep making it themselves. And that leads us to something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Because the money thing matters. Not because money equals quality, obviously it doesn't, but because the size of that deal tells you something about how the industry values South Park versus how it values Family Guy. In 2025, Parker and Stone signed a new 5-year deal, reportedly worth $250 million a year. That's $1.25 billion over 5 years, to keep South Park on Comedy Central and bring it exclusively to Paramount Plus as the streaming home. Compare that to Family Guy, which got renewed through season 27 in April 2025 as part of a mega deal with Disney. That deal is significant, sure. Family Guy delivered over 3 billion multi-platform minutes watched in 2025 and was the second most watched adult animation streaming title, according to Nielsen. But nobody's throwing $1.25 billion at Seth MacFarlane specifically for Family Guy. The economics tell you who the industry thinks is essential and who's a reliable performer. But here's the thing, I'm not trying to dunk on Family Guy. I know that sounds weird given everything I've just said, but I mean it. Because to understand why South Park stayed relevant, you have to understand something that South Park itself understands better than maybe any other show on television. The difference between having a point of view and just being funny. I want to talk about this because I think it's the core of everything. South Park has a philosophy. It's not always consistent. It's not always right. Parker and Stone would be the first to tell you they've been wrong about things. They've said as much about episodes like Man, Bear, Pig, where they mocked Al Gore, and climate change activism in season 10, only to come back years later in season 22 and essentially admit that, yeah, Man, Bear, Pig was real all along, and they were the ones burying their heads in the sand. That's growth. That's a show that's willing to eat crow and incorporate that self-correction into the story itself. But the underlying worldview of South Park has stayed remarkably consistent since the beginning. Don't be an extremist about anything. Don't let ideology replace thinking. And above all, don't take yourself so seriously that you can't laugh at yourself. This is the show that satirized both sides of every political debate so consistently that there's a term for it: South Park Republicanism, or South Park Centrism, where the show's default position is that everyone is an idiot, every movement eventually goes too far, and the truth is usually somewhere in the uncomfortable middle where nobody wants to stand. And you know what's funny? I didn't always like that about the show. I think there was a stretch, maybe around seasons 19 and 20, when they were doing serialized storylines about political correctness in the 2016 election, where the both sides are dumb thing started to feel lazy. Like, okay, you're making fun of everything, but are you actually saying anything? And I remember thinking, maybe South Park had lost it. Maybe the show had gotten so committed to not picking a side that it had nothing left to say. But then they did something that reminded me why the show matters. Season 21, Episode 2, Put It Down, aired September 20th, 2017. And this one genuinely floored me when I first watched it. On the surface, it's about Tweek freaking out over North Korea and the threat of nuclear war. But what it's really about is anxiety. Real, actual anxiety. The kind that sits in your chest and won't leave. And there's this scene where Craig Tucker, Tweek's boyfriend, this kid who normally doesn't care about anything, he's trying to help Tweek calm down, and he realizes that logic doesn't work. You can't just tell someone with anxiety that everything's going to be fine. That's not how it works. And the show treats that with genuine empathy. It doesn't make fun of Tweek for being scared. It takes his fear seriously and asks, what do you actually do when someone you love is drowning in something you can't fix? And that's the part that gets me, because Family Guy would never do that. Not because it can't. There have been moments, scattered across 24 seasons, where Family Guy has tried to be emotional or meaningful. But those moments always feel like they're visiting from another show. They don't grow organically out of the story or the characters. They feel grafted on. Whereas South Park can go from Cartman scheming to get a kid's parents killed and fed to him in Chile. Scott Tenerman Must Die, Season 5, Episode 4, July 11th. 2001, if you want the specifics, to a genuinely heartbreaking meditation on anxiety in the space of a few seasons. And both feel authentic. Both feel like the same show, because the show was built by people who care about what they're saying, even when what they're saying is a fart joke. Here's the thing about South Park's comedy that I think people miss, especially people who write it off as just shock humor. The shock is never the point. The shock is the delivery mechanism. The point is always underneath. Take Trapped in the Closet, Season 9, Episode 12, aired November 16th, 2005. On the surface, this is an episode where Stan gets told he's the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard because he scored really high on a Scientology personality test. And yes, it's hilarious. Tom Cruise literally gets trapped in a closet and refuses to come out, while R. Kelly shows up to narrate. But what the episode actually does, and this is the part that got Parker and Stone in genuine legal and professional trouble, is lay out the actual beliefs of Scientology with a scrolling text at the bottom of the screen that says, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." That wasn't a joke. That was journalism disguised as comedy. They were using the protection of parody to tell people things that Scientology had spent millions of dollars trying to keep secret. The fallout was real. Isaac Hayes, who voiced Chef and was a practicing Scientologist, released a statement saying he could no longer be part of the show because of what he saw as religious intolerance. Parker and Stone responded, and I love this, by pointing out that Hayes had been perfectly fine with South Park making fun of Christians, Muslims, Jews, and basically every other group on Earth, but drew the line when it was his religion getting the treatment. The next season, they opened with The Return of Chef, Season 10, Episode 1, March 22nd, 2006, where they killed off Chef in one of the most bizarre death scenes in the show's history. Chef gets struck by lightning, impaled, burned, mauled by a mountain lion, and then ripped apart by a grizzly bear. It was petty, it was brutal, and it was honest. They weren't going to pretend everything was fine. Family Guy has never done anything remotely like that. And I don't mean killed off a character in a petty way. I mean taken a real-world stand that had real consequences and then doubled down on it. Family Guy's approach to controversy has always been more of a poke than a punch. They'll reference something edgy, cut away to a joke about it, and then move on before the audience has time to think about whether they actually said anything meaningful. And I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up. I think the cutaway gag format, the thing that defined Family Guy from the very beginning, is actually the reason the show could never evolve. Because cutaway gags are structurally anti-narrative. They pull you out of the story. They exist in their own self-contained universe of reference and punchline, completely disconnected from character and plot. And when you build a show around that format, you're building a show that can never go deeper. You can go wider, more gags, more references, more random tangents. But you can't go deeper, because depth requires continuity. It requires the audience to remember what came before and feel the weight of what's happening now. And every time Family Guy cuts away to, "This is like that time I fought a chicken," or "Remember when I met this celebrity?" it resets the emotional clock to 0. South Park doesn't do that. South Park's format, 4 kids in a small town reacting to the world, is infinitely expandable in every direction. It can be a political satire. It can be a character study. It can be a horror story. It can be a musical. It can be whatever Parker and Stone are feeling that week. Because the format is built around story and character, not gag structure. And that flexibility is why the show is still alive. I've rewatched Cartoon Wars probably 6 times putting this video together, and it hits different every time. Because when you watch it now, knowing everything that's happened since, knowing that South Park is pushing towards its 31st season, while Family Guy grinds through its 24th in a completely different cultural position, the manatee scene doesn't just feel like a joke. It feels like a prophecy. Let me walk you through it, because the details matter. Cartoon Wars Part 1, Season 10, Episode 3, April 5th, 2006. Cartoon Wars Part 2, Season 10, Episode 4, April 12th, 2006. The setup: an episode of Family Guy is about to air that features the Prophet Muhammad as a character. The town of South Park panics. Cartman sees an opportunity, not to protect anyone from offense, but to get Family Guy canceled entirely because he hates the show. Kyle wants to stop Cartman because he believes in free speech. They race to Hollywood on tricycles. Kyle's tricycle goes off a cliff and explodes for no reason, which is itself a parody of over-the-top action sequences. And then, and this is the part that's really important, Cartman meets with the president of Fox and discovers the secret of how Family Guy is written. It's the manatees. A tank full of manatees with balls labeled with random words. Laundry, date, winning, Mexico, Gary Coleman, and whatever combination of balls ends up in the slot becomes a joke. No intention, no craft, just random generation. Now here's what I think most people miss about this. The manatee joke isn't just Parker and Stone being mean. It's a philosophical argument about what comedy is supposed to be. The trucker who gives Kyle a ride to Fox says something that I think is the key to the whole two-parter. He says he likes Family Guy, and he knows it's just joke after joke, but at least it doesn't get all preachy and up its own rear end with messages. And Kyle pauses, because that's a real argument. There's a genuine case to be made that pure entertainment, jokes for the sake of jokes, no agenda, no message, is perfectly valid. And the show lets that argument exist. It doesn't dismiss it. But then Kyle argues back. If you let people get away with lazy comedy just because it's inoffensive, you're lowering the bar for everyone. And if you censor one thing because someone threatens violence, then eventually everything gets censored, because anyone can threaten violence about anything. That's the free speech argument. And the episode lands on Kyle's side, but it doesn't pretend the other side is stupid. And here's what kills me about the behind the scenes of this episode. Parker and Stone actually had to fight with Comedy Central to air it. They wanted to show Muhammad uncensored, because they'd already shown Muhammad in the 2001 episode Super Best Friend, and nobody batted an eye back then. But this was 2006, after the Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten had published cartoons depicting Muhammad that sparked worldwide protests. Comedy Central refused to air the image, so Parker and Stone wrote the censorship into the episode. When the Family Guy episode within the episode airs, Muhammad appears behind a black title card that says Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network. That actually aired. The censorship became part of the satire. And then, to drive the point home, the episode ends with a cartoon made by terrorists in retaliation, showing Jesus defecating on President Bush and the American flag. And that was shown uncensored. The message was crystal clear. You'll censor Muhammad because you're afraid of real violence, but you'll show Jesus being degraded because Christians won't threaten to kill anyone over it. And Parker and Stone were saying, that's the problem. That's the slippery slope. Fear dictates what's acceptable, not principle. Seth MacFarlane watched all of this happen, and in a 2012 interview with Rolling Stone, he said the Cartoon Wars episode was funny and accurate. But then he added that he didn't understand the personal venom Parker and Stone directed at him in press appearances. And here's the thing, I actually think MacFarlane was being honest. I think he genuinely didn't understand why Parker and Stone were so angry. Because to MacFarlane, Family Guy was entertainment. It was a product. It was a machine designed to produce laughs. And there's nothing wrong with that, in his view. But to Parker and Stone, comedy isn't just a product. It's an argument. It's a weapon. It's a way of engaging with the world that carries responsibility. And when they looked at Family Guy, this massively successful show that was regularly grouped with South Park as if they were doing the same thing, they saw a show that had all the reach, but none of the purpose. And that infuriated them. Because it was, in their words, one of the meanest things anyone could say to them. You guys have one of the best shows on television, you and Family Guy. Lumping them together was the insult. And I think time has proven their point. Not because Family Guy is bad, it's not, it's fine. It's sometimes very funny, but because South Park is still having conversations that matter, and Family Guy is still doing cutaway gags. In 20 years, the format hasn't evolved. The characters haven't grown. Peter is still dumb. Stewie is still an evil genius baby. Except now he's gay and self-aware about it, which is interesting, but hasn't fundamentally changed the show's DNA. Brian went from being the intellectual voice of reason to being an insufferable liberal stereotype, which was kind of funny as a meta-commentary for about 2 seasons, before it just became the character. Meg is still the punching bag. Chris is still Chris. Meanwhile, over in South Park, Cartman has gone from a bratty fat kid who hates hippies to one of the most complex antagonists in television history. Randy Marsh went from being Stan's embarrassing dad to the de facto lead of the show, running a marijuana farm called Tegrity Farms that became a multi-season arc. Butters evolved from a background character into the show's most sympathetic figure, this earnest, naive kid who keeps getting ground up by everyone around him and somehow stays good. Kenny, who spent the first 5 seasons dying every episode as a running gag, became a character with genuine pathos when the show revealed his family's poverty and his capacity for selflessness. South Park's characters grew because Parker and Stone grew. The show aged with its creators. Family Guy's characters stayed the same because the show was designed to be eternal, not evolving. And there's a cost to that. The cost is relevance. Let me give you a specific example. I want to compare how each show handled the same cultural moment. In May 2024, South Park released The End of Obesity, a Paramount Plus special. It tackled the Ozempic craze, the weight loss drug that had taken over the cultural conversation. And the special didn't just make jokes about Ozempic. It dug into the actual healthcare system, the class divide between people who can afford wonder drugs and people who are stuck with the old-fashioned option, and the way the pharmaceutical industry profits from both hope and desperation. Cartman, who has always been fat, who has always been mocked for being fat, who the show itself has used as a joke about fatness for nearly 3 decades. Cartman becomes the lens through which the show examines a real, current, deeply complicated issue. And the special is funny. It's genuinely funny. But it's also saying something that sticks with you after the credits roll. Family Guy, in the same time frame, was doing what? I honestly don't remember. And that's the point. I'm not saying there weren't funny episodes. I'm saying none of them entered the cultural conversation the way South Park's specials did. None of them trended on social media because people were debating the argument the show was making. Family Guy gets watched, South Park gets discussed. And if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video. So let me go even deeper. I want to talk about something that I think is maybe the most underappreciated aspect of South Park's longevity, the production model itself. We talked about the 6-day cycle earlier, but I don't think people fully understand how radical that is for an animated show. Most animated series, Family Guy included, have a production timeline measured in months. A typical Family Guy episode takes roughly 9 to 10 months from script to screen. That means the writers are working on jokes and stories that won't air for the better part of a year. That's why Family Guy's topical humor always feels slightly off. They're writing about things that might not be relevant by the time the episode airs. They can make evergreen pop culture references, and they can do timeless character comedy, but they can't respond to last week's news. South Park can, and does, constantly. When Osama bin Laden was killed in May 2011, South Park had a joke about it in an episode that aired weeks later. When the BP oil spill happened in 2010, they had Coon 2, Hindsight, a multi-episode arc that directly satirized both the disaster and the public response. When the 2016 election happened, and everyone expected Hillary Clinton to win, South Park had to hastily rewrite their election night episode because they'd assumed, like most of America, that Clinton would beat Trump. The episode that aired the next day was messy and disjointed, precisely because the show was reacting in real time. And honestly, that messiness made it more honest than any polished take could have been. That's what the 6-day model gives South Park: honesty. The ability to be wrong, be surprised, be messy, and have all of that show up on screen. Family Guy can't do that. It's too far ahead of itself. It's always working on next year's jokes today. And I want to be clear, this isn't just about speed. It's about what the speed enables. When you make a show in 6 days, you can't second guess yourself into oblivion. You can't focus group the edge off your jokes. You can't have a dozen executives weigh in on whether this joke about the president might offend advertisers. You have to trust your instincts and go. And Parker and Stone's instincts, sharpened by decades of working this way, are remarkably good, not perfect. They'll be the first to tell you about episodes they hated. Parker literally tried to get Comedy Central to pull Make Love Not Warcraft, Season 10, Episode 8, October 4th, 2006, because he thought it was terrible. That episode went on to win the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2007. It's consistently voted by fans as one of the greatest episodes of the entire series. Parker's instinct was wrong about that one, but the system worked because the system doesn't allow for paralysis. You know what else the 6-day cycle does? It keeps the show from getting precious. Every episode is disposable. Every episode is made under conditions that would break most creative teams. And because of that, there's no room for ego. There's no room for iptar. This has to be our masterpiece. It just has to be done. And when you remove the pressure of perfection, you often get something more interesting than perfection. You get something alive. Family Guy's production model, the months-long pipeline, the writer's room that Seth MacFarlane hasn't actively participated in since 2010, the separation between creation and execution produces a different kind of show, a consistent show, a reliable show, a show that delivers exactly what you expect every time with no surprises. And for a long time, that was enough. Family Guy's revival in 2005, after being canceled twice and brought back by DVD sales and Adult Swim reruns, was one of the great comeback stories in television. The show came back to a Sunday night slot right after The Simpsons, and it thrived there for years. But somewhere along the way, and I think this is genuinely hard to pinpoint, because decline is always gradual, the consistency became the problem. People knew exactly what they were getting, and eventually, exactly what I expected, stopped being a reason to tune in and started being a reason to tune out. The ratings tell the story. Family Guy's 4th season, the comeback season, 2005, averaged 7.9 million viewers. By season 11, it was 6.94 million. Season 12 dropped to 6.11 million. By season 17, it was down to 3.33 million. Season 23 premiered in February 2025, with the show bouncing around the schedule. Sunday nights one week, Thursday nights another, and pulling numbers that would have been unthinkable during its peak. The show is on its 24th season as of March 2026, still chugging along, still renewed through season 27, still producing content. But the conversation has moved on. And I think about this a lot when people say, South Park has declined too, because they're not wrong, exactly. South Park's output has decreased dramatically. The show went from producing 14 to 18 episodes per season in its early years to 10 episodes per season starting in 2013, then 6-episode seasons starting in 2020. Then a mix of 6-episode seasons and Paramount Plus specials. In 2024, the show released only a single special, The End of Obesity, and no regular episodes at all, making it the lowest output year in the show's history. Season 27, when it finally arrived in 2025, was only 5 episodes long. 5. That's it. The shortest season ever. But here's what I think people miss when they compare the raw numbers. South Park topped the Paramount Plus streaming charts for weeks during season 27. It was the most watched show on the platform. In early January 2026, even after season 28 had ended with a Christmas special weeks earlier, South Park was still headlining Paramount Plus's most watched top 10. Fewer episodes, but each one landing like an event. Each one generating conversation. Each one mattering. Family Guy, by contrast, produces more content, but generates less cultural impact per episode. It's the difference between a sniper and a machine gun. South Park takes fewer shots, but each one hits something specific. Family Guy sprays and hopes for the best. And I realize I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to everything. South Park has a point of view. Family Guy has a format. A point of view can evolve. A format can only repeat. Let me talk about the election thing, because I think it's really revealing. South Park has covered every presidential election since 2000. Douche and Turd in Season 8, November 3rd, 2004, where the town has to choose between a giant douche and a turd sandwich for their school mascot. That episode became a cultural shorthand for how people feel about election. The phrase, giant douche versus turd sandwich, entered the political lexicon. People used it unironically during the 2016 and 2020 election. I saw it on protest signs. I saw it in newspaper editorial. I saw it in academic papers about voter apathy. A 22-minute cartoon episode about elementary school kids choosing a mascot became part of how America talks about democracy. That's insane when you think about it. That's the kind of influence that most prestige dramas would kill for. And it came from a show that was made in 6 days by 2 guys who animate with computers designed to look like construction paper. Then, 2016 happened. Season 20 was built around the election, with Mr. Garrison, who had been transformed into a Trump stand-in, running for president against Hillary Clinton. Parker and Stone wrote the season assuming Clinton would win. When Trump won instead, they had to rewrite the episode that aired the next day. Oh geez. Season 20, Episode 7, November 9th, 2016, is noticeably disjointed because of this. The serialized storytelling of that season, which had been building towards a specific conclusion, suddenly had nowhere to go. And Parker and Stone acknowledged this. They admitted they got caught with their pants down, just like half the country. But here's the thing, that honesty, that willingness to be wrong on national television, that's what keeps people trusting South Park. They're not trying to pretend they have all the answers. They're just trying to be honest about what they see. And sometimes what they see is wrong, and they'll say so, eventually. In 2024, Parker and Stone made the deliberate decision to skip the election entirely. They said they had nothing left to say about Donald Trump. South Park had never skipped an election cycle before in its entire history, and some people saw that as the show losing its nerve. But I actually think it was the opposite. I think it was the show being honest with itself. If you don't have something real to say, don't say anything. Don't do an election episode just because people expect you to. That's the Family Guy move. Filling the space, because the space needs to be filled. South Park chose silence, and that silence said something. Family Guy, by the way, has never really engaged with elections in any meaningful way. There have been episodes that reference politics, sure, but the show has never built a storyline around an election, never used an election as a lens to examine something deeper about the country. And why would it? The cutaway format doesn't lend itself to sustained political commentary. You can have Peter say something dumb about a candidate, cut to a gag, and move on. But you can't build the kind of argument that Douche and Turd built. You can't create a phrase that enters the national vocabulary. You can't because the structure won't support it. Okay, I want to shift gears here, because I've been talking a lot about what South Park does right and what Family Guy does wrong. And I think it's only fair to talk about where South Park has stumbled, because it has. And pretending otherwise would be the kind of thing South Park itself would mock. The serialized era, roughly seasons 19 through 22, from 2015 to 2018, was messy. Season 19 introduced PC Principle and built a season-long arc about political correctness that had some incredible moments, but also felt like it was straining against the show's format. South Park was built for standalone episodes. It was built for the 6-day cycle, where each episode is its own self-contained thing. When they tried to tell a continuous story across an entire season, it sometimes worked beautifully, and sometimes felt like they were making it up as they went along, which, to be fair, they were. Season 20 was the worst of it. The Memberberry storyline, this nostalgia satire about people who can't stop living in the past, had potential, but it got tangled up with the election arc and the internet troll storyline, and it just collapsed under its own weight. The finale was widely considered one of the weakest in the show's history, and I remember watching it and thinking, for the first time, maybe South Park really has lost it. But then season 21 came along, and season 22, and the show quietly course-corrected. They pulled back on serialization. They went back to mostly standalone episodes with some continuity threads. Tegrity Farms became a recurring element, but not a serialized prison. And the show felt vital again, not perfect, but alive. Still willing to swing for the fences, even if it meant striking out sometime. And this is something Family Guy never figured out how to do: course correct. When Family Guy started declining, when the cutaways got longer and more self-indulgent, when Brian became insufferable, when the shock humor escalated without purpose, the show didn't change. It just kept doing what it had always done, slightly louder, slightly more desperately. The Death of Brian arc in season 12, where they killed Brian, replaced him with a dog named Vinny, and then brought Brian back 2 episodes later, felt like a ratings stunt, because it was. The first episode of the arc drew big numbers. Then viewership dropped off, and the show quickly reversed course. It wasn't a creative decision. It was a business decision, dressed up as storytelling, and the audience felt that. It eroded trust. South Park has never killed a character for rating. Kenny's deaths were always a joke, a structural gag built into the show's DNA from episode 1. When they stopped doing it as frequently, they didn't make a big deal out of it. They just evolved. When they brought elements back, like the Cthulhu mythology, or the Black Friday trilogy, or the pandemic specials, they did it because they had something to say, not because they needed a bump in the numbers. This is one of those episodes I think about randomly at like 2 a.m. There's this moment in You're Getting Old, season 15, episode 7, June 8th, 2011, where Stan turns 10 years old and suddenly everything sounds and looks like crap to him. Music sounds like fart noises, movies look terrible, and his parents start fighting, and they actually separate. Randy and Sharon split up. Stan moves away, and the episode ends on this genuinely devastating montage set to Fleetwood Mac's Landslide. No jokes, no resolution, just sadness. And I remember when that aired, people were seriously wondering if South Park was ending, because it felt like a goodbye. It felt like Parker and Stone were saying, "We're tired. We think everything is crap now, and we don't know how to fix it." And the fact that the next episode, Asperger's, season 15, episode 8, October 5th, 2011, essentially hit the reset button and put everything back to normal was both a relief and a disappointment. But the point was made. The show acknowledged its own existential crisis. It said, out loud, on screen, what happens when the people making the show stop enjoying it? Family Guy has never had that conversation with its audience, because Family Guy doesn't have that kind of relationship with its audience. It's not a confessional, it's a product, and products don't have existential crises. And look, I know some people will push back on this and say I'm being too hard on Family Guy, and maybe I am, because the truth is, Family Guy has given millions of people millions of hours of entertainment. It made people laugh when they needed to laugh. It was there on Sunday nights, reliable and familiar, like comfort food, and there's value in that. Not everything has to be important. Not everything has to change the conversation. But the question we're asking tonight isn't, is Family Guy good? The question is, why did South Park stay relevant while Family Guy faded? And the answer, I think, comes down to 3 things. 1. South Park is made by the people who care most about it. Parker and Stone are in the room every week, putting their name on every episode. Family Guy is made by talented people who are executing someone else's vision. And the person whose vision it was left the writer's room 15 years ago. 2. South Park has a point of view that evolves. It's willing to be wrong, willing to correct itself, willing to engage with the world as it actually is, rather than as it was when the show started. Family Guy has a format that repeats. Cutaway gags, pop culture references, shock humor. The delivery mechanism hasn't changed in 27 years. 3. South Park's production model, the 6-day cycle, the real-time response to current events. The pressure cooker creativity gives it a vitality that no traditionally produced animated show can match. Family Guy's 9-month production pipeline means it's always reacting to yesterday's news with last year's jokes. And I think there's a 4th thing, actually. Something harder to quantify, But maybe the most important of all, South Park respects its audience enough to assume they can handle complexity. It assumes the viewer is smart enough to follow an argument, to sit with ambiguity, to disagree with the show and still enjoy it. Family Guy assumes the viewer wants to laugh and not think. And for a while, that assumption was correct for a lot of people. But audiences grew up. Comedy evolved, the bar moved, and South Park moved with it, while Family Guy stayed where it was. It's funny, and I mean this literally, that the most perfect summary of this entire dynamic came from South Park itself. In Cartoon Wars Part 2, there's a moment where a trucker defends Family Guy by saying at least it doesn't get preachy. And Kyle's response, essentially, is yeah, but being entertaining without being meaningful is easy. The hard thing is being both, and South Park, at its best, is both. I want to close by talking about something that happened recently, because I think it captures everything we've discussed tonight in a single image. In July 2025, Parker and Stone signed their new deal with Paramount. The announcement came just before season 27 premiered on July 23rd. South Park would be exclusively on Paramount Plus in the United States, ending its 5-year run on HBO Max. 50 new episodes, 5 seasons, 10 episodes per year. The show was coming back to a regular, robust schedule for the first time since 2019. And when season 27 aired, it did something the show hadn't done consistently in years. It focused on the kids: Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. The core four, the foundation. After years of Randy Marsh dominating the show, after years of Tegrity Farms and pandemic specials and political satire that sometimes forgot the kids existed, the show went back to its roots, and the response was overwhelming. South Park spent weeks at the top of Paramount Plus's streaming charts. It was, by some measures, more popular than it had been in years. Meanwhile, Family Guy premiered its 24th season on February 15th, 2026 on Fox. 2 new episodes per week, a scheduling change designed to burn through the season faster. The show announced a Stewie spin-off series, ordered for 2 seasons, set to premiere in the 2027 to 28 season. The machine keeps producing. Content begets more content. But nobody's talking about it the way they talk about South Park. Nobody's debating Family Guy episodes at 2 in the morning. Nobody's writing essays about what Family Guy said this week. The show exists. It persists. But it doesn't matter the way it used to. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not every show is supposed to matter forever. Maybe Family Guy's role was to be the funniest show on television for a few years in the mid-2000s. And it accomplished that. And now it's gracefully aging into something people leave on while they scroll their phones. There are worse fates, but South Park is still fighting, still swinging, still making people angry, making people think, making people laugh at things they're not supposed to laugh at. After 28 seasons, after 338 episodes, after nearly 30 years on the air, the show is still in the conversation. And that's not because it's the funniest show. It's not always. It's not because it's the smartest show. It gets things wrong all the time. It's because it's the most alive show. It's made by people who still care, using a process that doesn't allow them to get comfortable, about a world that never stops giving them material. And you know what? I think that's the answer to the whole question. Why has South Park stayed relevant while Family Guy faded? Because South Park is scared of becoming irrelevant. Because Parker and Stone are scared of becoming the manatees, of becoming the random ball generators, producing content without meaning, filling space without purpose. And that fear, that constant, nagging, productive fear, is what keeps the show sharp. It's what kept them up until 7 in the morning, finishing scripts they weren't sure about. It's what made them admit they were wrong about climate change. It's what made them skip the 2024 election rather than phone it in. Family Guy isn't scared of anything, and that's both its greatest comfort and its fundamental limitation. But I want to show you what I mean. Not with theory, with a specific episode. Because I think there's a single 22 minutes of television that captures this entire argument. The whole South Park versus Family Guy thing. The whole question of what comedy is for, better than anything else in either show's history. And it's not Cartoon Wars. It's Scott Tenerman Must Die. Season 5, Episode 4. Aired July 11th. 2001, the 69th episode overall. And if you haven't seen it, I mean, I'm assuming most of you have, but if you haven't, just know that what I'm about to describe is one of the most perfectly constructed 22 minutes of television ever made. Not just in animation, in all of television. The setup is simple. Cartman buys pubic hair from an older kid named Scott Tenerman for for $10, thinking it means he's hit puberty. Kyle and Stan tell him he's an idiot. You have to grow your own pubes. You can't buy them. Cartman realizes he's been scammed and tries to get his money back. But Scott is smarter than Cartman. Every scheme Cartman comes up with, Scott sees through it and humiliates him further. Scott burns Cartman's money in front of him. He shows the whole town a video of Cartman squealing like a pig. Kenny literally laughs himself to death watching it. And that's the part that gets me. Because up to this point, you think you're watching a comedy about a dumb kid getting outsmarted by an older kid. That's the show. That's what it looks like. But then Cartman goes quiet. And whenever Cartman goes quiet, that's when you should be afraid. What follows is, and I'm not exaggerating here, a revenge scheme that involves getting Scott's parents killed by a farmer for trespassing, grinding their bodies into chili, feeding the chili to Scott at a chili cook-off, and then revealing everything to Scott while his favorite band, Radiohead, watches and tells him he's not cool. The band actually guest voiced in the episode. Tom York and the guys actually recorded lines. And Cartman, this 9-year-old, overweight, bigoted, sociopathic child, stands there watching Scott cry and licking his tears off his face, saying, "The tears of unfathomable sadness. Yummy." Parker and Stone have said this episode changed everything about the show. In their words, it took Cartman from being kind of a little shithead to probably the most evil kid in the world. And they debated whether to actually go through with it, whether it was okay to have a kid orchestrate the murder and cannibalization of someone's parents. But they decided to do it because they knew, instinctively, that it would set a new bar for the show. And it did. After Scott Tenerman must die, there was no going back. Cartman was a monster, and the show was richer for it. Now, why am I bringing this up in a video about South Park versus Family Guy? Because this episode is the perfect example of why South Park endures and Family Guy doesn't grow. Scott Tenerman Must Die is a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has character development. Real, permanent character development that would echo through 20 plus more seasons of the show. It has stakes, it has consequences, and it has a twist ending that Rolling Stone called the perfect high-low amalgamation of the show's ability to be both shocking and brilliant at the same time. The episode holds up on a 9th rewatch, not because the twist is surprising anymore, you already know what's coming, but because the construction is so meticulous. Every failed scheme, every humiliation, every moment where Scott seems to win, it's all part of Cartman's actual plan. The randomness wasn't random. Every piece was placed deliberately. Family Guy has never made an episode like that. Not once in 450 plus episodes. And I don't say that to be mean. I say it because it's true. And the reason it's true tells you everything about the difference between these two shows. Family Guy's structure, the cutaway, the tangent, the non sequitur, doesn't allow for this kind of storytelling. You can't build a meticulous 22-minute revenge plot when you keep cutting away to remember the time Peter fought the chicken every 3 minutes. The format is the ceiling. Okay, here's something I want to get into that I don't think many people talk about when they compare these two shows. The animation. I know. South Park looks like it was made in 5 minutes with construction paper. That's the whole point. When Parker and Stone made that first episode in 1997, they used actual construction paper cutouts animated with stop motion. It looked crude. It was supposed to look crude. And when they moved to digital animation, using Autodesk Maya, which they've used ever since, they deliberately maintained that aesthetic. The characters look like paper cutouts. The movements are stiff. The backgrounds are flat. Everything is intentionally lo-fi. And here's what I think is genius about that. It means the show can never hide behind its animation. There's no spectacle. There's no visual distraction. If the writing isn't good, there's nothing to save the episode. You can't compensate for a weak script with a beautiful chase sequence or an elaborate fight scene. The animation is a straitjacket that forces the show to be funny and smart because it can't be anything else. Family Guy went the opposite direction. The animation started rough in season 1. That Hollywood Reporter review from 1999 called it clunky, but over the years, it became smoother, more polished, more generic. It looks like every other network animated show now, and that polish actually hurts it in a way, because when you have the ability to create elaborate visual gags, the chicken fights, the musical numbers, the extended cutaway sequences, you start relying on them. The visuals become a crutch. The show can be entertaining to watch without being particularly well written because the animation carries you through. South Park can't do that. If an episode of South Park is boring, it's just flat paper characters standing around talking. There's nowhere to hide. And that constraint has made the show better. I actually have a similar theory about the voices. Parker and Stone voice almost every male character on South Park between the two of them. Trey does Cartman, Stan, Randy, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey. Matt does Kyle, Kenny, Butters, Tweak, Craig. The list is enormous. They do different pitch variations and mouth positions, but it's clearly two guys. And that limitation, that the show sounds like two guys doing voices, gives it this intimate, handmade quality. It sounds like someone telling you a story, not a produced entertainment product. A story. McFarlane, to his credit, is also a phenomenal voice actor. He voices Peter, Stewie, Brian, Quagmire, and a bunch of others. But the supporting cast, Alex Borstein, Seth Green, Mila Kunis, Patrick Warburton, they're professional voice actors giving polished performances. It sounds like what it is, a major network animated show with a large cast of talented professionals. And that's fine, but it doesn't have the same warmth. It doesn't have the same feeling of, we made this in our living room. Let me tell you about another moment that I think encapsulates the divide between these shows. It's not a famous moment. It's not an episode people normally bring up, but I think it's one of the most revealing things either show has ever done. In South Park, Season 19, Episode 1, Stunning and Brave, which aired September 16, 2015. The show introduces PC Principal, this giant, aggressive frat bro character who becomes the new principal of South Park Elementary and polices language with physical violence. He screams at people for using the wrong pronoun. He beats up Cartman for making an insensitive joke. He is, on the surface, a parody of political correctness culture. And the obvious reading, the one that a lot of people had at the time, was that South Park was making fun of PC culture. And yeah, on one level, they were. But here's what's actually interesting about PC Principal. He doesn't go away. In most South Park episodes, the antagonist of the week shows up, causes chaos, and then disappears. PC Principal stayed. He became a recurring character. He evolved. He got a girlfriend, who turned out to be a sentient ad algorithm, but still. He had emotional moments. He became part of the fabric of the show. And over the following seasons, the show's relationship with PC Principal changed. He went from being a straightforward villain to something more complicated. A guy who genuinely believes in treating people with respect, even if his methods are over the top and counterproductive. The show started asking, is it possible that the PC movement is right about the goals, even if it's wrong about the methods? And that's a nuanced question. That's a question that requires the show to sit in discomfort and not rush to a punchline. Family Guy's approach to similar material has been the opposite. When Family Guy engages with political correctness, and it has, sporadically, over the years, it tends to just make the joke and move on. There's no sustained engagement. There's no evolution of the idea over multiple seasons. It's a cutaway. Remember when we couldn't say X anymore? Or, this is like the time I accidentally offended a whole group of people. Joke made, joke consumed, joke forgotten. And I think this difference, the ability to sustain an idea across time, to let it evolve, to change your mind about it, as you live with it. That's the difference between a show that stays relevant and a show that becomes wallpaper. It's the difference between a living document and a sealed time capsule. South Park is a living document. It gets updated. It gets revised. It contradicts itself. It argues with its own past. Family Guy is a time capsule from 2005. You open it up, and everything inside is perfectly preserved, and also kinda musty. I want to go somewhere kind of unexpected here, because I've been talking a lot about writing and philosophy and creative vision. But I think there's a more basic, more visceral reason why South Park has maintained its cultural position while Family Guy has declined. And it's this. South Park has always been willing to piss people off. Not in the shock humor sense. That's not what I mean. I mean in the, we are going to say something that will make powerful people genuinely angry, and we know there will be consequences, and we're going to do it anyway sense. I already talked about the Scientology episode and the Muhammad episode, but let me run through a few more, because the pattern is remarkable. 200 and 201, the 200th episode, Season 14, Episodes 5 and 6, aired April 14th and 21st, 2010. These episodes brought back every celebrity South Park had ever mocked and tried to reveal Muhammad. Comedy Central censored the entire episode so heavily that Kyle's final speech, which was apparently about the importance of not giving in to intimidation, was entirely bleeped out. Parker and Stone received actual death threats from a radical group called Revolution Muslim. The New York Police Department stepped up protection for South Park Studios. This wasn't a publicity stunt. People genuinely feared for Parker and Stone's safety. And what did they do? They didn't back down. They didn't apologize. They didn't stop making the show. The very next episode was a completely unrelated story about a fish sticks joke. They just kept going, because that's what they do. Has Family Guy ever faced anything like that? Has Seth MacFarlane ever received death threats because of an episode? Not that I know of. And that's not because MacFarlane is a coward. I don't think he is. It's because Family Guy doesn't take positions that are dangerous enough to provoke that kind of response. It's edgy in a controlled, managed, network-approved way. It pushes buttons, but only buttons that have been pre-approved for pushing. South Park pushes the big red button that says, "Do not push," and then stares directly into the camera while the building burns down behind them. And I think audiences feel that difference, even if they can't articulate it. They can feel which show is genuinely dangerous, and which show is performing danger. They can feel which show is making jokes from a place of real conviction, and which one is making jokes because jokes are the product. Let me give you one more example of this, because I love this story. In 2002, South Park won a Peabody Award. A Peabody, that's one of the most prestigious awards in broadcasting, and the citation praised the show for its postmodern social commentary and for pushing the boundaries of animated television. This is a show about foul-mouthed kids in Colorado that features a talking piece of poo named Mr. Hanky, and it won a Peabody. In 2009, Family Guy received a Primetime Emmy nomination for Outstanding Comedy Series. That was huge. It was the first animated show to receive that nomination since The Flintstones in 1961, and that's legitimately impressive. But there's a difference between, we nominated you because you're very popular, and we're giving you a Peabody because your work matters. Both are achievements, but they mean different things. Alright, I want to talk about one more thing, and it's something that's been on my mind throughout this whole video. It's the audience. South Park's audience has evolved over the decades. The people who started watching in 1997, when the show was this crude, shocking novelty that parents hated, those people are in their 40s and 50s now, and some of them still watch. But South Park has also continuously attracted new audiences, in part because the show keeps changing, and in part because its cultural references are always current. A teenager today can watch a season 27 episode about current events and connect with it immediately. They don't need to understand the context of the late 90s to appreciate the show. Family Guy's audience, by contrast, seems to have aged in place. The peak audience, the people who loved the show during its 2005 revival, are still the core audience, and the show's humor is still calibrated to that era. The pop culture references still skew toward movies and TV shows from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. The cultural sensibility is still rooted in that mid-2000s edgy internet humor that defined the post-Adult Swim era. It's nostalgia humor for people who grew up during a specific moment in pop culture. And that's fine, but it's inherently limiting. It means the show can't expand its audience in the way South Park can, because the humor is addressed to a specific generation. And here's the thing that I think is most telling about the audience divide: the internet. South Park memes are everywhere. The "this is fine" energy of Randy Marsh doing something insane. The "you're gonna have a bad time" ski instructor from season 6, episode 3. Aspen, March 13th, 2002. Respect my authority. Cartman's power trip catchphrase: "Screw you guys, I'm going home. They took our jobs," from season 8, episode 6. Goobacks, April 28th, 2004, which became "They took her gerbs" and entered the political lexicon as shorthand for anti-immigration hysteria. These phrases and images circulate constantly on social media, getting recycled into new contexts, applied to new situations. South Park's cultural vocabulary is alive. It keeps getting used because the show keeps producing new material that resonates with current events. Member berries from season 20 became shorthand for toxic nostalgia. Man Bear Pig became a way to reference something real that people refuse to take seriously. Giant douche versus turd sandwich is still how people talk about elections, where they don't like either candidate. Even "I'm not fat, I'm big boned" transcended the show and became a universal deflection phrase. These aren't just pop culture references, they're linguistic tools, concepts that help people articulate ideas they couldn't express as concisely any other way. South Park has given the culture a vocabulary for talking about itself. What has Family Guy contributed to the language? Giggity, Cool Whip, with the exaggerated W. Peter's "you know what really grinds my gears" is probably the closest to a genuine cultural contribution, and even that functions more as a complaint template than a concept. The show is recognizable, quotable, and widely loved, but there's a difference between being quotable and being conceptually generative. South Park generates ideas that people use to understand the world. Family Guy generates catchphrases that people use to be funny on the internet, and that's a meaningful distinction. Family Guy memes exist too. Peter falling down, the "oh no, our table, it's broken," Consuelo reference, various cutaway gag screenshots, but they tend to be reaction images, generic expressions of a feeling, rather than specific arguments or ideas. Nobody uses a Family Guy meme to make a political point. Nobody quotes a Family Guy episode to illuminate a social issue. The show's cultural vocabulary is functional. It expresses simple emotions, but it's not loaded with meaning in the way South Park's is. And there's another layer to this that I find really interesting, which is how each show's fan community has evolved. South Park's fandom has always had an analytical streak. There are entire YouTube channels, and I'm not just talking about this one, dedicated to breaking down individual episodes, exploring the philosophy of the show, debating whether Parker and Stone were right or wrong about specific issues. There are academic papers about South Park, actual peer-reviewed academic papers. The show has been analyzed through the lens of political philosophy, media theory, religious studies, and critical race theory. There's a book called South Park and Philosophy. You know, I learned something today, part of the Popular Culture and Philosophy series that treats the show as a legitimate philosophical text. Family Guy's fandom, while large and enthusiastic, is more focused on consumption than analysis. The subreddit is mostly memes and favorite moment compilations. The YouTube presence is mostly clip channels. And that's not a criticism of the fans. It's a reflection of the show. You analyze what rewards analysis. South Park rewards analysis because there's always more underneath the surface. Family Guy is the surface. What you see is what you get. The joke is the joke. There's no subtext to mine, no hidden layer to discover, and that makes for a different kind of fandom. Loyal, engaged, but not obsessive in the way that drives long-term cultural relevance. And that matters more than you might think, because in the age of social media, a show's relevance is partly determined by how often people reference it in conversations that have nothing to do with the show itself. South Park gets referenced in political discussions, in debates about healthcare, in arguments about free speech, in conversations about religion and technology and capitalism. Family Guy gets referenced when someone trips and falls or when something mildly awkward happens. The referential footprint tells you the difference. And that brings me to what I think is the single clearest illustration of the gap between these shows, the pandemic. Because the pandemic was the ultimate test of which show could actually respond to the world in real time, and the results were devastating. But first, I need to talk about what happened in the years leading up to the pandemic, because the streaming era changed the landscape for both of these shows in ways that I think are underappreciated. When Warner Media acquired the exclusive streaming rights to South Park in October 2019 for HBO Max, the deal was reportedly worth $500 million. $500 million. For a show about construction paper kids in Colorado. That deal put South Park on a streaming platform alongside Game of Thrones, Friends, and The Big Bang Theory as one of the service's marquee titles. And it worked. South Park was consistently one of the most in-demand shows on HBO Max during its entire run on the platform. According to Parrot Analytics, South Park was the third most in-demand title on HBO Max over a full year period, behind only Game of Thrones and Rick and Morty. Family Guy, during the same period, was streaming on Hulu in the United States and Disney Plus internationally, and it performed well. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. In 2025, Family Guy delivered over 3 billion multi-platform minutes watched and ranked as the second most watched adult animation streaming title. Those are real numbers. But here's the distinction. South Park's streaming presence felt like an event. People sought it out. They talked about it. When the show's library moved from HBO Max to Paramount Plus in the summer of 2025, it was news. Entertainment reporters covered it. Fans debated the implications. The move itself became part of the cultural conversation. When Family Guy added new holiday specials on Hulu in 2024, Peter Pumpkin Cheater for Halloween and Gift of the White Guy for Christmas, it was fine. Nobody panicked. Nobody debated the future of the show. It just happened. Content was produced. Content was consumed. The machine kept running. And I think that difference between being an event and being content is the streaming era version of the same argument I've been making throughout this entire video. South Park is something people go to. Family Guy is something that's there. And in a streaming landscape with infinite options, something people go to is infinitely more valuable than something that's there. There's another aspect of this that I find really interesting, and it has to do with how the shows exist in the broader cultural ecosystem. South Park has contributed more to the English language than almost any other comedy show of the last 30 years. Think about the phrases and concepts that came from South Park and entered everyday speech. They took our jobs, which became "they took our gerbs," is now shorthand for anti-immigration hysteria. It came from Season 8, Episode 6, Goobacks, aired April 28, 2004. "Respect my authority," Cartman's catchphrase, is used to mock people on power trips. "I'm not fat, I'm big boned," another Cartman classic, became a universal deflection joke. "Giant douche versus turd sandwich," which we talked about earlier, is how people talk about elections where they don't like either candidate. "Blame Canada," from the 1999 movie, became a phrase people actually use when they want to deflect blame onto a convenient scapegoat. "Man Bear Pig" became a way to reference something real that people refuse to take seriously. "Member berries," from season 20, became shorthand for toxic nostalgia, for the way people cling to a sanitized version of the past instead of engaging with the present. These aren't just pop culture references, they're linguistic tools. They're concepts that help people articulate ideas they couldn't express as concisely any other way. South Park has given the culture a vocabulary for talking about itself. What has Family Guy contributed to the language? Giggity, Cool Whip, with the exaggerated W. "It's a trap" is sometimes attributed to Family Guy, but actually comes from Return of the Jedi. Peter's "You know what really grinds my gears" is probably the closest to a genuine cultural contribution. And even that was a segment within the show, rather than a concept that transcended it. And I don't say this to diminish Family Guy's cultural presence. The show is recognizable, quotable, and widely loved. But there's a difference between being quotable and being conceptually generative. South Park generates ideas. Family Guy generates catchphrases. There's one more thing I want to get into before we move to the pandemic, and it's how each show handles children. Because both shows are ostensibly about kids. South Park's main characters are 4th graders, and Family Guy has Chris, Meg, and Stewie. But the difference in how they use these child characters tells you everything about the show's priorities. South Park's kids feel like kids. They talk in exaggerated, profane ways, obviously, but their concerns are kid concerns, filtered through the show's satirical lens. Stan worries about his parents' marriage. Kyle struggles with his identity as a Jewish kid in a mostly Christian town. Cartman is desperate for approval, for power, for love, and he expresses all of that through the only tools a kid has: manipulation, lying, and tantrum. Kenny's silence and poverty give him a quiet dignity that occasionally erupts into heroism. These are recognizable childhoods, distorted through a carnival mirror, but still fundamentally real. Family Guy's child characters are less like children, and more like comedy archetypes wearing child costume. Chris is the dumb kid. That's his entire deal. Meg is the unpopular kid who the show itself bullies, which was funny for about 2 seasons and then became uncomfortable. Stewie is an evil genius baby who evolved into a closeted gay toddler with world domination fantasies, which is the most interesting character arc on the show, but also the one that's least connected to anything resembling childhood. And I think this matters because the way a show treats its children reflects its attitude toward growth. South Park's kids grow, slowly, imperfectly, sometimes backward, but they grow. They learn things. They change. Family Guy's kids don't grow because the show doesn't need them to grow. They're joke delivery systems. And joke delivery systems don't age, don't change, and don't evolve. They just deliver. Okay, now the pandemic. On September 30th, 2020, South Park aired the Pandemic Special, an hour-long special, the first extended episode in the show's history, the 308th episode overall. The world was on fire. The United States had been in lockdown for 6 months. Over 200,000 Americans had died. Schools were closed. Businesses were shuttered. The country was tearing itself apart over masks, over protests, over everything. And everyone was wondering, what's South Park going to say about this? The answer was everything. In 60 minutes, they tackled COVID-19, police brutality, racial unrest, the failure of remote learning, the absurdity of mask debates, and, because this is South Park, they revealed that Randy Marsh had caused the entire pandemic by having sex with a bat and a pangolin in Wuhan, China. That's the show. That's what it does. It takes the most serious, most devastating real-world events and processes them through the most absurd, offensive, ridiculous lens imaginable. And somehow, and this is the part that never stops amazing me, on the other side of that lens, there's truth, real, actual, uncomfortable truth about who we are and how we respond to crisis. The special also dealt with the reopening of schools, with the police department, defunded after brutality incidents, being reassigned as teachers. Cartman, who had been thriving under lockdown because it meant he could skip school, was furious. The image of Cartman being handcuffed to a desk by a cop-turned-teacher was both hilarious and eerily close to reality. And Butters, poor Butters, was trapped at home by his parents, who were too paranoid to let him outside, even as restrictions eased. His father called improperly worn masks chin diapers. I've rewatched this special probably 5 times, and the chin diapers line gets me every single time because it captures a very specific type of pandemic-era person with surgical precision. The Pandemic special drew 4.05 million total viewers across Comedy Central, MTV, and MTV2. It earned a 2.06 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic, the show's highest in 7 years. It was the #1 scripted cable telecast of 2020. Not just comedy, not just animation, all of scripted cable television. In a year dominated by the pandemic, South Park's take on the pandemic was the most watched scripted thing on cable. Chris McCarthy, then president of Viacom CBS's entertainment and youth brands, credited Parker and Stone's creative instincts for the special's massive performance. And I keep thinking about the timing. The special aired on September 30th. The first presidential debate between Biden and Trump had happened the night before, September 29th, and it was chaos. The whole country was processing multiple crises simultaneously. And South Park showed up and said, "We see all of this, we're going to talk about all of it, and we're going to do it in the most South Park way possible." What was Family Guy doing in September 2020? I had to look this up because I genuinely couldn't remember. Season 19 of Family Guy premiered on September 27, 2020, with an episode called Stewie's First Word. The premise? Stewie says his first word, which is an F-bomb. It's fine. It's a Family Guy episode. It has jokes. Some of them land. But here's the thing. It was written and produced months before the pandemic had reached its worst. The show couldn't respond to the moment because the production pipeline doesn't allow for it. By the time Family Guy could have addressed the pandemic, the cultural conversation had moved on. South Park's response wasn't just faster, it was more necessary. People needed someone to process 2020 through comedy, and South Park was the only animated show that could do it in real time. Family Guy literally couldn't compete, not because of talent, because of structure, and this pattern repeated. In 2021, South Park released the South Park Q Vaccination Special, tackling vaccines, QAnon, and the new normal. It was the top cable telecast of the year, with nearly 3.5 million total viewers. Then came post-COVID, and post-COVID, the return of COVID on Paramount Plus later that year. 2 feature-length specials that imagined the South Park characters as adults, 40 years into the future, still dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic. And these weren't just topical gags. They were genuine speculative fiction. They asked, what does the world look like after this? Who do these kids become? What breaks? What survives? Cartman, in the future segments, is married to a Jewish woman and has converted to Judaism. He's kind. He's gentle. He has children named Menorah and Yiddish. And you think, wait, has Cartman actually changed? Has he grown? And then the show pulls the rug out, because of course it does, and reveals that it was all an elaborate manipulation. Because Cartman is Cartman. He doesn't change. He adapts his evil to whatever environment he's in. And that's a devastating insight into certain kinds of people, the ones who seem to reform, but are really just recalibrating. Family Guy has never done anything remotely that ambitious with its characters. Peter Griffin in Season 1 is essentially the same character as Peter Griffin in Season 24. He's dumb, he's impulsive, he means well, but screws everything up. That's his deal. That's been his deal for 27 years. And look, consistency isn't inherently bad. Homer Simpson hasn't changed much either, but The Simpsons had the benefit of being first, of defining the template. Family Guy is copying that template, while South Park is rewriting the rules entirely. And since I brought up The Simpsons, I want to spend a moment on the three-way dynamic between these shows, because I think it illuminates the whole conversation. The Simpsons is the grandfather. It created the modern adult animated sitcom. And in its golden era, roughly seasons 3 through 8, it was the greatest television comedy ever made. Parker and Stone have always been vocal about their respect for The Simpsons. And when they made Cartoon Wars, The Simpsons writers reached out to thank them for attacking Family Guy. The King of the Hill writers did the same. Parker has said that The Simpsons staff hates Family Guy even more than South Park does. There was what he called an animation solidarity moment, where everyone did come together over their hatred of Family Guy. And here's the thing about that dynamic. The Simpsons showed that animation could be smart. South Park showed that animation could be dangerous. Family Guy showed that animation could be successful without being either. It carved out a space where you didn't have to be smart or dangerous. You just had to be funny in a specific, rapid-fire, reference-heavy way. And for a while, that space was enormous, but the space got smaller. The internet ate into it. Twitter and TikTok do rapid-fire, reference-heavy comedy better than any scripted show. Meme culture replaced cutaway culture. The specific kind of humor that Family Guy perfected. The random pop culture reference, the tangentially connected gag, the remember when joke. That humor is now the default mode of the entire internet, which means Family Guy isn't offering anything you can't get for free in 30 seconds on your phone. South Park, on the other hand, offers something the internet can't replicate: a sustained, authored, 22-minute argument about a specific topic made by specific people with specific opinion. Those are fundamentally different propositions, and only one of them is worth paying a streaming subscription for. I want to talk about Butters for a minute, because Butters Stotch might be the most important character in understanding why South Park has lasted as long as it has, and he has no equivalent in Family Guy. Butters started as nobody. He was a background character in the early seasons, one of the kids in class, barely distinguishable from Token or Craig or Clyde. But over the course of the show, Parker and Stone fell in love with the character. And I think the reason is that he represents something South Park desperately needed: genuine innocence. In a show where everyone is cynical, where every character has an angle, Butters is sincere. He believes what people tell him. He tries to do the right thing. He gets punished constantly, grounded by his paranoid, abusive parents, manipulated by Cartman, ignored by his friends, and he keeps coming back with the same open, trusting face. He's the show's moral center, and the show needs a moral center, because without one, the cynicism would become unbearable. The thing about Butters that I think is remarkable from a craft perspective is that he evolved naturally. Parker and Stone didn't sit down and say, "We need an innocent character." They just kept writing him into situations and discovered that his earnestness was funny, but also moving, but also tragic. And all three of those things at once: funny and moving and tragic. That's the holy grail of character writing. That's what keeps people watching for decades. Does Family Guy have a Butters? The closest equivalent might be Chris, the dim, good-natured son who doesn't fully understand the world around him. But Chris has never been developed the way Butters has. He's never been given episodes that explored his inner life with genuine empathy. He's a supporting character in a show that doesn't really support its supporting characters. And this connects to the larger point about long-term audience investment. People don't watch South Park for 20 years because they want to see what random topic gets satirized next. They watch because they care about these characters. They care about Stan's relationship with his dad. They care about Kyle's moral struggles. They care about whether Cartman will ever face real consequences. They care about Butters. That emotional investment, built up over hundreds of episodes, that's what keeps the audience loyal through the show's rough patches. Family Guy's audience is loyal to the format, not the characters. They come back because they want cutaway gags and Peter Griffin being dumb. And when that stops being surprising, there's nothing deeper to hold on to. I want to give you one more episode comparison before we move on. Look at the best episode of each show, the one that each fan base points to as the pinnacle, and the difference tells you everything. For South Park, one of the top candidates is the Imagination Land trilogy from season 11, episodes 10 through 12, airing October 17th through November 14th, 2007. The premise: terrorists attack Imagination Land, the place where all fictional characters live. The government gets involved. Cartman wins a bet with Kyle and tries to force Kyle to suck his balls, which goes to the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, the characters from our collective imagination are fighting a war between good and evil. Gandalf is there, Luke Skywalker is there, Care Bears, and Freddy Krueger too. It's insane. But underneath the absurdity, the trilogy is asking a real philosophical question. Are imaginary things real? Do fictional characters matter? If something only exists in our minds, does it have less value than something in the physical world? And the show's answer is yes. Imaginary things are real. They're as real as anything else because they affect us. They shape us. They change how we think and feel. That's a profound statement for a show about foul-mouthed kids. And it's a statement that only South Park could make, because only South Park has the audacity to put Cartman's ball-sucking bet and a genuine philosophical meditation on the nature of reality in the same episode and make both work. Family Guy's best episode, according to most fan polls, is probably Road to the Multiverse, Season 8, Episode 1, September 27, 2009, where Brian and Stewie travel through parallel universes. And it's excellent. The animation shifts between different styles for each universe: Disney, Robot Chicken, live action, and the creativity is impressive. It's one of the few Family Guy episodes that pushes the boundaries of what the show can do. But even at its best, the episode is about the gimmick. The parallel universes are fun because they're visually interesting and they allow for clever reference humor. There's no underlying philosophical question. There's no argument. It's entertainment, high-quality entertainment. South Park at its best is entertainment that also changes how you think. Family Guy at its best is entertainment that makes you say, That was clever. Both are achievements, but one lasts longer in your memory. Let me talk about something else that I think explains a lot about why these shows ended up where they did: the relationship with the audience. South Park's audience has always been participants, not just viewers. From the very beginning, the show had hidden jokes, coded messages, and Easter eggs embedded throughout episodes. There are actual cryptograms in the end credits of many early episodes. The show inspired an entire community of fans who analyze and decode these things. The South Park Wiki is one of the most comprehensive fan-created resources for any television show. People don't just watch South Park, they study it. And Parker and Stone encourage this. They've done AMAs on Reddit. They did the 6 Days to Air documentary. They've been relatively open about their creative process. They give DVD commentary. They engage with the fan community, not as celebrities dispensing wisdom, but as fellow weirdos who can't believe they get to do this for a living. That authenticity creates a bond between the creators and the audience that's hard to fake and impossible to replicate. Family Guy's relationship with its audience is more transactional. The show makes jokes. The audience consumes them. There's some fan engagement. The Family Guy wiki exists. There are subreddits. There's online discussion, but it lacks that sense of shared discovery. Family Guy doesn't hide things for fans to find. It doesn't encode secret messages. It doesn't reward obsessive rewatching with new layers of meaning. What you see is what you get. And again, that's fine, but it means the audience's engagement is shallower. You watch, you laugh, you move on. With South Park, you watch, you think, you discuss, you come back. And in the streaming era, that difference matters enormously. The shows that thrive on streaming are the ones that generate conversation, the ones that people text each other about, post about, make memes about, argue about. South Park generates all of that. Family Guy generates background noise. There's this thing that happened in 2019 that I think perfectly encapsulates the different cultural positions of these two shows. South Park Season 23, Episode 2, Banned in China, aired October 2nd, 2019. The episode depicted the Chinese government censoring entertainment and criticized American corporations, specifically Disney and the NBA, for bowing to Chinese pressure. The episode included a parody of Disney's live-action Mulan remake, with Mickey Mouse enforcing Chinese censorship rules. The response from China was immediate and real. South Park was reportedly pulled from the Chinese internet. The show was scrubbed from streaming platforms, social media sites, and search engines in China. In response, Parker and Stone issued what might be the greatest official statement in television history. They wrote, "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy. She doesn't look just like Winnie the Pooh at all. Tune into our 300th episode on Wednesday at 10 p.m. Long live the great Communist Party of China. May this autumn's sorghum harvest be bountiful. We good now, China." That's the whole statement. That's it. They got banned from China, and their response was to mock the ban. Can you imagine Family Guy doing that? Can you imagine any other animated show doing that? The sheer audacity of it, the willingness to antagonize a major market, to sacrifice potential revenue, to refuse to play the game that every other entertainment company plays when it comes to China. That's what makes South Park South Park. It's not just that they make jokes about powerful people, it's that they accept the consequences of those jokes without flinching. And here's what fascinates me about the aftermath. The Banned in China incident actually increased South Park's cultural cachet. It made the show more relevant, not less. People who hadn't thought about South Park in years were suddenly sharing Parker and Stone's statement and saying, "This is what free speech looks like." The show became a symbol of artistic independence in an era of corporate capitulation. And that goodwill, that reputation for genuine courage, carries forward. When South Park makes a joke now, people know it's not focus grouped, not sanitized, not approved by a committee of nervous executives. It's raw, it's real, and even when you disagree with it, you respect it. Family Guy, by contrast, has spent the last decade gradually removing potentially offensive material. In a 2018 interview, Seth MacFarlane acknowledged that the show would be pulling back on jokes about the LGBTQ community and other sensitive topics, saying that things have changed and the show needs to evolve with the times. And that's not unreasonable. Cultural norms do change, and comedy should be responsive to that. But it does mean that Family Guy has moved in the opposite direction from South Park. While South Park doubles down on its willingness to offend anyone, Family Guy has been quietly sanding down its edges. And the result is a show that's less likely to piss people off, but also less likely to excite anyone. Okay, so I want to talk about one more thing before we start wrapping up, and it's the future. Because both of these shows have very different futures ahead of them, and I think the contrast is telling. South Park as of the most recent deals, is contracted through 2030. Parker and Stone are making 10 episodes per year, streaming exclusively on Paramount Plus with same-day availability after airing on Comedy Central. They're 55 and 53 years old. They still write. They still voice characters. They still pull the all-nighters. Matt Stone said in a late 2024 interview that they don't have an end in sight for the show, that South Park is a sandbox for them, a place they come back to after working on other projects, a creative playground that still gives them energy. And I believe him, because the show still sounds like two guys who want to be there. You can hear it in the voices. You can feel it in the writing. There's a looseness, a joy, can you believe we're getting away with this? Energy that hasn't faded. It's the same energy that was in Cartman Gets an Anal Probe in 1997. The tools have changed. They're using Maya instead of construction paper, but the spirit is the same. Family Guy's future is more conventional. The show has been renewed through season 27, which will take it through the 2028 to 29 season. A Stewie spinoff was ordered in March 2026 for 2 seasons on Fox, set to premiere in 2027 to 28. McFarlane will executive produce and continue voicing Stewie, with longtime Family Guy writer Kirker Butler serving as showrunner. The machine keeps expanding. More content, more characters, more platforms. But here's what strikes me about these two trajectories. South Park's future depends on two guys continuing to care. If Parker and Stone stop caring, the show ends. There's no one to hand the keys to. The show is them. That's a risk. What happens if one of them can't work anymore? But it's also a quality guarantee. As long as they're making it, it'll be there. Family Guy's future doesn't depend on any one person. McFarlane could step away entirely, stop voicing characters, stop producing, stop engaging, and the show would probably continue. It's a brand now, not an artist's expression. And brands are resilient. They survive personnel changes, leadership transitions, cultural shifts, but they also tend to calcify. They become what they've always been, because no one has the authority or the vision to change them. I think about this a lot when I think about the legacy question. When both of these shows are finally over, and they will be, eventually, even if it takes another 30 years, what will people remember? I think people will remember South Park the way they remember All in the Family, or MASH, as a show that was in conversation with its times, that reflected the chaos and complexity of the era it existed in, that was sometimes wrong, but always engaged. People will study South Park. They'll write papers about it. They'll use it to understand what America was like in the early 21st century. Family Guy, I think, will be remembered the way people remember Three's Company or Gilligan's Island, as a fun, sometimes brilliant piece of entertainment that defined its era but didn't transcend it. People won't study Family Guy. They'll watch clips on YouTube and laugh and then move on. And that's okay. Not everything has to be studied. Not everything has to transcend. But the question we started with tonight was about relevance. And relevance requires engagement. It requires a show that's willing to risk something, to say something, to be something more than a delivery system for jokes. South Park takes that risk every single week. Family Guy stopped taking it a long time ago. And you know what the really funny thing is? The most self-aware moment in Family Guy's entire history came in season 15, episode 1, Into Fat Air, which premiered September 25th, 2011. In the episode's subplot, Stewie acknowledges that the show hasn't been as good as it used to be and wonders if they've lost something. It's a brief moment, almost throwaway, but it's there. The show knows. It knows it's not what it was, and it keeps going anyway. South Park had a similar moment in You're Getting Old, the episode I mentioned earlier where everything sounds and looks like crap. But the difference is that South Park used that self-awareness as a creative turning point. It acknowledged the crisis and then fought through it. Family Guy acknowledged the crisis and then didn't do anything about it. The awareness didn't lead to change. It was just another joke. And that's actually a perfect segue into something I've been wanting to talk about, because I think it proves the point better than anything else we've discussed tonight. And it's not even about the TV show itself. It's about what happened when Parker and Stone left the TV show's format entirely. In 2011, Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and Robert Lopez, the guy who would go on to write the songs for Frozen, premiered a Broadway musical called The Book of Mormon. And I know what you're thinking. What does a Broadway show have to do with an animated comedy on Comedy Central? Everything. The Book of Mormon won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. It became one of the highest grossing shows in Broadway history. It ran for over a decade. The original cast recording won a Grammy. And here's the thing. The humor is unmistakably South Park. It's crude, profane, sacrilegious, and deeply, genuinely, surprisingly compassionate. It makes fun of Mormon missionaries in Uganda, and then it makes you care about them. It's shocking, and it's emotional, and it's smart, and it's stupid, all at the same time. It's South Park on stage. And the reason this matters for our conversation is that the Book of Mormon proved that the South Park sensibility is not a gimmick. It's not dependent on the animation. It's not dependent on the format. It's not even dependent on the character. The sensibility, the Parker Stone worldview of nothing is sacred, everything is fair game. But underneath the chaos, there's genuine human feeling. That sensibility works in any medium. It works as a 22-minute cartoon. It works as a 2-hour Broadway musical. It works because it's real. It's an actual artistic vision, not a formula. Family Guy has never expanded beyond its format in a meaningful way. There have been video games, Family Guy, Back to the Multiverse, in 2012, Family Guy, The Quest for Stuff in 2014, but they're brand extensions, not artistic exploration. There's been talk of a Family Guy movie for years. As recently as April 2024, McFarlane mentioned plans for a feature film at PaleyFest, but it hasn't happened. And I think one reason it hasn't happened is that the Family Guy format, the rapid-fire cutaway gags, the disconnected jokes, the 30-second reference humor doesn't scale to 2 hours. You can sustain that for 22 minutes. You can even sustain it for the 72-minute runtime of the Stewie Griffin Untold Story DVD movie. But a full theatrical film requires sustained narrative, character arcs, emotional stakes. It requires the things that South Park naturally does, and Family Guy naturally avoids. South Park did make a movie, by the way. In June 1999, less than 2 years after the show premiered, South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, hit theaters. It was a full musical. Original songs by Parker and Stone and Mark Shaman. One of those songs, Blame Canada, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. The movie grossed $83 million worldwide on a $21 million budget. It was rated R. It was a movie about cartoon children who see a dirty movie and then start a war, and it got an Oscar nomination. And the movie itself is genuinely great. I'm not saying that as a South Park fan. I'm saying it as someone who watches a lot of movies. The musical numbers are legitimately well crafted. Uncle Efka is catchy in a way that should be illegal. What Would Brian Boitano Do is a perfect parody of inspirational ballads. And Blame Canada actually functions as a real song. It has melody, it has structure, it has emotional dynamics. These aren't joke songs pretending to be real songs. They're real songs that happen to be hilarious. And that dual nature, comedy that's also genuinely good at the thing it's parodying, that's a Parker and Stone signature. The movie also does something that the show couldn't do at the time. It goes all the way. Because it was rated R and in theaters, it didn't have to deal with Comedy Central's standards and practices. So they went absolutely unhinged. Satan and Saddam Hussein are in a romantic relationship. Kenny goes to hell and has to lead a revolt. The boys form a resistance movement called Law Resistance. The United States goes to war with Canada. It's chaos. And yet it holds together as a story in a way that a 2-hour Family Guy movie almost certainly wouldn't, because the chaos is in service of a narrative, not in place of one. And here's the part of the story that's so perfectly South Park that it could be an episode of the show. When Parker and Stone attended the Oscars for the Blame Canada nomination, they showed up in dresses. Parker wore a replica of Jennifer Lopez's green Versace gown. Stone wore a pink ball gown. They've said in interviews that they were on acid at the time, at the Academy Awards, nominated for an Oscar, on acid, in dresses. I also want to touch on Team America, World Police, because it's another piece of evidence in this argument. The 2004 movie, entirely done with marionettes, like Thunderbirds, but obscene. Parker directed, Stone produced, they co-wrote it together. And it's relevant to our discussion because of what it represents in the broader context of Parker and Stone's creative ambition. Team America was released on October 15th, 2004, 1 month before the Bush-Kerry presidential election. And the movie savaged everyone. It made fun of Bush's war on terror. It made fun of liberal Hollywood celebrities who opposed the war. It had a puppet sex scene so graphic that it nearly got an NC-17 rating. The MPAA made them cut the scene 9 times before they'd give it an R. And the whole time, Parker and Stone were also producing South Park. Season 8 was airing that same fall. They've talked about how making Team America nearly broke them physically and mentally, and how that exhaustion actually produced one of South Park's most fondly remembered episodes, Quest for Ratings, Season 8, Episode 11, which was basically made in a state of delirium because they were doing double duty. That willingness to push themselves beyond what's reasonable, to take on projects that might destroy them, to refuse to play it safe. That's the creative temperament that keeps South Park alive. McFarlane works hard too, I'm not denying that. Creating and voicing multiple animated shows while pursuing a film career and a music career is no small small thing. But McFarlane's ambition is expansive. He wants to do more things. Parker and Stone's ambition is intensive. They want to do fewer things, but push each one to the absolute limit of what's possible. That's the energy. That's the fundamental difference between these two creative operations. Parker and Stone don't treat their success as something to be managed or protected. They treat it as an opportunity to be even more ridiculous, even more dangerous, even more themselves. And that irreverence, that refusal to be impressed with themselves, that willingness to show up to Hollywood's biggest night dressed like they're attending a costume party at the end of the world, is infectious. It keeps the show from ever feeling self-important. It keeps the audience from ever feeling like they're being lectured to. Even when South Park is making a serious point, there's always this undercurrent of, we know this is absurd. We know we're cartoon makers. We're not pretending to be important, but we are going to tell you what we think anyway. Family Guy takes itself more seriously than you'd think. McFarlane's Hollywood ambitions, the Ted movies, the Oscar hosting gig, the Orville, these are the pursuits of someone who sees himself as a legitimate industry player, and he is. He's enormously talented and enormously successful, but that ambition creates a gravitational pull away from Family Guy. The show becomes one item in a portfolio rather than the center of someone's creative life. I want to go back to one more specific episode comparison, because I think looking at how each show handles the exact same topic tells you everything. Both shows have dealt with video game culture. South Park gave us Make Love Not Warcraft, Season 10, Episode 8, October 4th, 2006, which I mentioned earlier. In that episode, the boys become so obsessed with World of Warcraft that they destroy their bodies and their social lives, trying to defeat a rogue player who's been killing everyone in the game. Blizzard Entertainment actually collaborated with South Park Studios on the episode, providing machinima footage from the actual game. The episode uses in-game footage seamlessly integrated with the regular South Park animation. And here's the best part. Trey Parker tried to get the episode pulled because he thought it was terrible. He was sure it was going to bomb. Instead, it won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2007 and is regularly voted the greatest episode in the show's history. The reason Make Love Not Warcraft works so well, and I've thought about this a lot, is that it's not just about video games. It's about obsession. It's about what happens when you invest your entire being into something meaningless. The boys spend weeks killing boars, the most boring, tedious activity in the game, leveling up slowly, methodically, painfully. They get fat, they get pale, they stop bathing. Cartman starts using a bedpan so he doesn't have to stop playing. And then, when they finally defeat the rogue player, Stan asks, "What do we do now?" And Cartman responds, "Now we can finally play the game." Think about that. They destroyed their lives, grinding for weeks, so they could get to the point where they could actually enjoy the thing. That's a commentary on obsession culture, on grind culture, on the way people sacrifice the experience of living for the achievement of having lived. It's profound. And it's wrapped in a joke about a fat kid using a bedpan. Family Guy has done gaming episodes. Season 10, Episode 8, Cool Hand Peter has a brief gaming subplot. Season 16, Episode 1, Emmy-winning episode, references gaming culture. But none of these episodes have the depth or the cultural penetration of Make Love Not Warcraft. They reference gaming. South Park understood gaming. And the difference between referencing and understanding is the difference between relevance and wallpaper. Let me tell you one more story, and then we'll wrap up for real this time. In Season 22, Episode 6, Time to Get Cereal, which aired November 7th, 2018, and its follow-up, Episode 7, Nobody Got Cereal, November 14th, 2018. South Park did something remarkable. They brought back Man, Bear, Pig. Now, if you've been watching South Park since Season 10, you know Man, Bear, Pig. It first appeared in Man, Bear, Pig, Season 10, Episode 6, April 26, 2006, as a creature that Al Gore was obsessed with finding. The joke at the time was that Al Gore was being paranoid and alarmist about something that didn't exist. Man, Bear, Pig was a metaphor for climate change, and South Park's position was, this is overblown, and for 12 years, that take aged badly. Climate change got worse. The science got more definitive. The consequences got more visible. And Parker and Stone, to their credit, knew it. So when Man, Bear, Pig came back in Season 22, it was real. Undeniably, devastatingly real. It was killing people. And the adults of South Park, the same people who had dismissed it in 2006, had to face the fact that they'd been wrong. Al Gore shows up and says, essentially, I told you so. And the town has to negotiate with Man, Bear, Pig, making deals to sacrifice things they love just to slow it down. This is one of those episodes I think about randomly at like 2 in the morning. Because think about what it takes for a show to admit it was wrong. Not our character made a mistake and learned a lesson. The show itself was wrong. Parker and Stone were wrong about climate change, and they used the show to say so. They didn't do it in an interview. They didn't tweet about it. They made an episode where the thing they'd mocked was real, and the people who'd mocked it were culpable. That's integrity. That's a creative team that cares more about truth than about being right. Family Guy has never done anything like this. Not because McFarlane or the writers have never been wrong about anything. Everyone has. But because the show's format doesn't support that kind of long-term accountability. The cutaway gag format is inherently amnesiac. It doesn't remember what it said last week, let alone what it said 12 years ago. There's no continuity to hold the show accountable, and without accountability, there's no growth. Remember what I said earlier about South Park having a point of view that evolves? This is what I meant. The man-bear-pig correction wasn't just good storytelling. It was the show living by its own philosophy. Everyone is wrong sometimes, and the worst thing you can do is refuse to admit it. And yeah, I know I keep circling back to this same point, but I think it's because it is the point. The single biggest difference between these two shows isn't the animation, isn't the production model, isn't the cultural positioning. It's this. South Park is a living, evolving, self-correcting, creative organism. Family Guy is a machine. Machines are reliable. They produce consistent output. They don't make embarrassing mistakes. They don't pick fights with China. They don't get banned from countries. They don't receive death threats. They don't show up to the Oscars on acid. But machines also don't win Peabody Awards for social commentary. They don't get billion-dollar deals because a network believes in the creative vision of two specific people. They don't make episodes that enter the political lexicon. They don't change the way an entire generation talks about elections and morality and free speech. Organisms do. South Park is an organism. It grows, it adapts, it learns, it sometimes gets sick, and it keeps going because the people at its core are alive and engaged and still finding new things to say. Family Guy is a machine. It runs, it produces, it delivers, and it'll keep going until someone decides to turn it off. Both have value. Both have given the world something, but only one of them is still in the conversation. And that's because conversations are for the living. And I think that's worth sitting with for a moment. Because the Man-Bear-Pig arc, across 12 years, across multiple seasons, is basically the show's thesis statement about how to stay relevant. You stay relevant by being honest, by being willing to revisit your own work and say, we got that wrong. Most shows can't do that because most shows don't have continuity, don't have self-awareness, and don't have creators who are still invested enough to care about getting it right 12 years after the original joke aired. I need to talk about the video games because I think they're another piece of this puzzle that people don't discuss enough. In 2014, Obsidian Entertainment and South Park Digital Studios released South Park: The Stick of Truth, an actual full-length 60-hour RPG. And it was good. Not good for a licensed game, good. Actually good. It received an 85 on Metacritic. It sold over 5 million copies. And the reason it worked is the same reason everything South Park does works. Parker and Stone were involved. They wrote the script. They voiced the characters. They treated it like an extension of the show, not like a product with the show's name slapped on it. The game let you be the new kid in South Park, team up with Cartman's fantasy army, fight elves, aliens, gnomes, and eventually the government. And throughout the entire thing, it felt like playing an episode. The humor was right. The voice acting was right. The pacing was right. Because the people who made the show made the game. In 2017, they did it again with South Park: The Fractured But Whole, this time with Ubisoft San Francisco developing. Another strong game, another extension of the show's universe, another project where Parker and Stone wrote and performed and cared. Family Guy's gaming output, by contrast, has been forgettable. Family Guy video game in 2006 got a 50 on Metacritic. Back to the Multiverse in 2012 fared similarly. The Quest for Stuff in 2014 was a mobile freemium game. Fine for what it was, but nobody's listing it alongside The Stick of Truth as a landmark in licensed gaming. And here's the broader point. Every time South Park expands beyond the TV show, the movie, the musical, the video games, it succeeds because the creative core is intact. Parker and Stone are there. Their voice is there. Their standards are there. When Family Guy expands, it's a brand exercise. The creative core is diffused across a large team, and the result is professional but generic. It lacks the specificity that makes the original show memorable. I also want to talk about something that often gets lost in these comparisons. Team America, World Police, the 2004 movie, entirely done with marionettes, like Thunderbirds, but filthy. Parker directed, Stone produced, they co-wrote it, and the movie is relevant to our discussion because of when it came out and what it did. Team America was released on October 15, 2004, 1 month before the presidential election between George W. Bush and John Kerry. And the movie savaged everyone. It made fun of Bush's war on terror. It made fun of liberal Hollywood celebrities who opposed the war. It had a puppet sex scene so graphic that the movie nearly got an NC-17 rating. And the central thesis, delivered through an incredibly crude monologue by a puppet, was that the world is divided into 3 groups, and none of them are entirely right. That's the South Park worldview, extrapolated onto a feature film. And the fact that Parker and Stone were making this movie while simultaneously producing South Park episodes, season 8 was airing that fall, tells you something about their work ethic and their commitment to saying things through whatever medium is available. They weren't protecting the South Park brand by only making South Park. They were using every tool they could find to engage with the world. MacFarlane, to his credit, has also been prolific outside Family Guy. Ted in 2012, A Million Ways to Die in the West in 2014, The Orville from 2017 to 2022. These are substantial projects, but none of them have the cultural weight of Team America or the Book of Mormon. They're entertainment products, well-made, often funny, commercially successful, but they don't provoke, they don't challenge, they don't make you uncomfortable in a way that eventually makes you think. And I think this is the fundamental difference in artistic temperament between these two creators. Parker and Stone use their platform to provoke. MacFarlane uses his platform to entertain. Both are valid uses, but only one of them generates the kind of cultural conversation that keeps a show relevant for 30 years. Let me talk about one more thing that I think hasn't been discussed enough tonight: the way these shows handle their own legacies. South Park is constantly in dialogue with its own past. The show references earlier episodes all the time, not as callbacks for fans, but as narrative building blocks. Scott Tenerman comes back in season 14's 200 and 201 with devastating revelations about Cartman's parentage. Pip, a background character from the first few seasons, gets killed off in a throwaway gag that longtime fans immediately clocked. The Imagination Land trilogy in season 11 pulls together dozens of characters and concepts from across the show's history into a single epic storyline. The show treats its own history as a resource, not a burden. Family Guy's relationship with its own past is different. It references itself, sure. Brian's death and resurrection in season 12 was a direct engagement with the show's own mortality, but the references tend to be meta jokes rather than narrative development. Peter will break the fourth wall and say, "Remember when we did that episode where," and it's a joke about the show being a show. It's clever, but it's surface level. It doesn't build. It doesn't accumulate meaning over time. And that accumulation of meaning is, I think, the secret ingredient in South Park's longevity. When you've been watching for 20 years, every new episode carries the weight of everything that came before. When Cartman does something awful, it's more awful because you know his history. When Butters gets hurt, it's more painful because you've watched him get hurt 100 times, and he keeps coming back with that same innocent, trusting face. When Randy does something stupid, it's funnier because you've seen a decade of Randy doing stupid things and somehow never learning. Family Guy doesn't have that weight. It has references. But references and weight are different things. Weight is what you feel when a character makes a choice that echoes through every previous choice they've made. References are what you notice when a joke calls back to a previous joke. One is emotional, the other is intellectual, and the emotional one is what keeps people coming back. I want to acknowledge something before we wrap up, because I've been very focused on the comparison, and I think it's important to be fair. Family Guy has done things that South Park never could. The musical numbers, when they work, they really work. MacFarlane is genuinely one of the most talented voice performers in animation history. The road to episodes featuring Brian and Stewie are often excellent. The show's willingness to be completely, unapologetically silly, to do a 3-minute chicken fight, or an extended gag about Peter hurting his knee, that silliness has value. Not everything has to be meaningful. Not everything has to be important. Sometimes you just want to watch a fat man fight a chicken. And I think the most honest comparison is this: South Park is a better show. Family Guy is a better product. South Park will be studied. Family Guy will be remembered. South Park changed the conversation. Family Guy joined it. Both have a place. Both have an audience. Both have given the world hundreds of hours of laughter, but only one of them is still in the arena, still bleeding, still swinging. Okay, now I'm actually done. For real this time. Let me leave you with one last thought. It's something Matt Stone said in that late 2024 interview, and I've been turning it over in my head ever since I read it. He said South Park is a sandbox, a place where he and Trey can play. And I love that metaphor because it captures everything about why the show works. A sandbox has no rules, no objectives, no points. You just build things and knock them down and build them again. The joy is in the building. The joy is in the playing. Family Guy isn't a sandbox. Family Guy is an assembly line. And assembly lines are impressive. They produce enormous quantities of stuff, but nobody plays on an assembly line. Nobody discovers anything unexpected on an assembly line. Nobody builds a castle out of sand on an assembly line and then laughs when it falls over. South Park is still playing. After nearly 30 years, after hundreds of episodes, after billions of dollars in deals, after death threats and Emmys and Peabody Awards and a Broadway musical and a movie that got an Oscar nomination, they're still playing, still building castles, still laughing when they fall. And that's why the show is still here. And that's why we're still watching. And if you're still awake, honestly, I'm kind of amazed. This has been a long one, probably the longest I've ever done, but I couldn't cut any of it. Every piece felt necessary. Every thread connected to every other thread. And I genuinely hope, that somewhere in all of this, there was something that made you think, or made you laugh, or made you want to go back and rewatch an episode you haven't seen in years. If you haven't subscribed, please do. It really helps, more than you know. And if you have subscribed, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I'll see you in the next one. Good night.